Mara stood in the kitchen, her hands submerged in soapy water as she stared blankly out of the window. The trees swayed in the gentle breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to one another, secrets she longed to unburden from her heart. The hum of the dishwasher behind her was the only sound in the house, and even that felt louder than the dwindling conversations between her and Ethan Thess. Their marriage had started like a sun-drenched morning, filled with warmth and promise. Ethan had been everything she thought she wanted, steady, dependable, and kind. They shared dreams once, sitting up late into the night in their tiny apartment, dreaming of the life they would build. But somewhere along the way, the vibrant hues of their low, Ethan's long hours at work, his focus on climbing the corporate ladder, had left Mara feeling like a ghost in her own home. He was there but not present, always glued to his phone or computer, his mind wrapped around deadlines and deals. She couldn't fault him for wanting to provide for them, but in his pursuit of success, he seemed to have forgotten how to simply be with her. It was during one of those long, lonely evenings that Daniel appeared. Ethan's best F. Mar. You. Mara he's. I don't. Daniel nodded. The word struck. That night, as Mara lay in bed beside Ethan, who was already fast asleep, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. You deserve to be seen. It wasn't love. The days that followed unfolded in a familiar pattern. Ethan left early for work, his kiss a mere brush of routine against her cheek. Mara went about her day, filling the hours with errands, chores, and the endless quiet that echoed through their home. Yet something had changed. Daniel's words lingered, like the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the cushions of the couch where they had talked. Mara told herself it had been nothing more than a conversation between friends. But when Daniel texted her a few days later, "Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need to talk," her pulse quickened. She hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She typed and deleted her response 3 times before finally settling on something casual. "Thanks. I appreciate that." But it didn't stop there. Their texts became a regular part of her day, a thread of connection she hadn't realized she was missing. At first, they were innocent, sharing funny memes or commenting on a show they both liked. But gradually, the messages grew longer, more personal. Daniel asked about her dreams, her favorite memories, the things that made her happy. Questions Ethan hadn't asked in years. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by unannounced. Mara was surprised when she opened the door to find him standing there, holding a bag of fresh pastries. "I was in the area," he said with a grin, holding up the bag. "Thought you might need a treat." Mara couldn't help but smile. "You're impossible, you know that?" They sat in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. Daniel's presence was easy, like slipping into an old sweater you'd forgotten how much you loved. They laughed about the pastries. Daniel had bought way too many, and talked about everything from their favorite childhood books to the places they wanted to visit someday. It wasn't until Daniel reached out to wipe a crumb from the corner of her mouth that Mara realized how close they had grown. His hand lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Mara pulled back, her cheeks flushing. I should clean up," she stammered, standing abruptly and gathering their plates. Daniel didn't push. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. But as he left that afternoon, Mara couldn't shake the warmth of his touch, or the way her heart had raced. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's visits became a quiet ritual. He would stop by with coffee or pastries, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Mara found herself looking forward to his company in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Ethan, oblivious to the growing bond between his wife and his best friend, remained as distant as ever. Mara told herself it wasn't her fault, that she had tried to reach Ethan, to bridge the gap between them, but he had been too preoccupied to notice. One evening, after Ethan had called to say he'd be working late again, Mara found herself texting Daniel. "Feel like keeping me company?" His reply was almost immediate. "Be there in 20. When Daniel arrived, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a tension that hung in the air like the first drops of rain before a storm. They sat on the couch, a movie playing in the background, though neither of them was paying attention. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Mara asked suddenly, her voice barely audible. Daniel turned to her, his eyes searching hers. Sometimes. But then I remind myself that we have the power to change it. His words stirred something deep within her. Mara looked away, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, or in her own reflection if she dared to confront the truth. That night, when Daniel left, the space he left behind felt like an open wound. Mara knew she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't take back. And yet, she couldn't seem to step away. The days grew heavier, as though time itself were conspiring to pull Mara deeper into the abyss she was trying to resist. Ethan's late nights at work were now a given, and though she hated herself for it, Mara had stopped feeling the sting of disappointment when he texted to say he'd be home late, if at all. Instead, her thoughts drifted to Daniel. His visits had become an unspoken part of her routine. The warmth he brought into the house felt like a balm for her loneliness, but it also carried with it a dangerous undercurrent, one she tried to ignore even as it pulled her further out to sea. One evening, the pull became too strong to resist. Daniel had arrived with a bottle of red wine, his smile as disarming as ever. The rain outside hammered against the windows, cocooning them in the soft glow of the living room. Mara poured the wine, her fingers brushing Daniel's as she handed him his glass. "To unexpected friendships," he said, raising his glass with a lopsided grin. Mara hesitated, the word friendship echoing in her mind. But she clinked her glass against his nonetheless, forcing a smile. "To unexpected friendships," she echoed, though her voice carried a note of something she couldn't name. They talked as they always did, their laughter filling the space Ethan's silence had left behind. But tonight something was different. Mara could feel it in the way Daniel's eyes lingered on her, in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. At some point, the conversation trailed off, replaced by a charged silence that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. Mara felt her heart pounding in her chest, the sound of it almost deafening in the stillness. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling. Whatever this is, it's wrong." Daniel set his glass down, his gaze never leaving hers. "It doesn't feel wrong, Mara. Not to me." The words hit her like a jolt, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek. "But it is," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm married to Ethan. You're his best friend." Daniel moved closer, his hand reaching out to gently brush the tear from her cheek. His touch was warm, his fingers lingering just long enough to make her breath catch. "Mara," he said softly, his voice like a melody she couldn't ignore. "When was the last time you felt alive? Truly alive?" She couldn't answer. The truth lodged itself in her throat, choking her. It had been so long since she'd felt anything other than numbness and routine. Before she could stop herself, she leaned into him, her body betraying her mind's desperate plea to pull away. Their faces were inches apart, the scent of wine and rain hanging in the air. And then it happened. Slowly, hesitantly, as though the world itself held its breath, Daniel closed the distance between them. His lips brushed against hers, soft and searching, and Mara felt her resolve shatter like glass. For a fleeting moment, time ceased to exist. There was no Ethan, no past, no future. Only the present, raw and electric. But as the kiss deepened, a tidal wave of guilt surged through Mara, forcing her to pull away. "I can't," she said, her voice barely audible, her hands trembling. "I can't do this." Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded, his expression filled with a quiet understanding that only made the ache in her chest worse. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't mean to complicate things." But they both knew it was too late for that. The line had been crossed, the boundary blurred. As Daniel left that night, the storm outside had subsided, but Mara felt as though one had just begun inside her. She sat in the darkened living room, the taste of the kiss still lingering on her lips, and wondered how she had allowed herself to get to this point. And yet, even as guilt consumed her, another feeling lingered beneath it, one she couldn't ignore. A feeling of being seen, of being desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was intoxicating, and it terrified her. Mara woke the next morning to a house bathed in the pale light of dawn, but it offered no clarity. The night before haunted her like a shadow, its weight pressing against her chest as she moved through the motions of her day. She tried to focus, on the laundry, the groceries, anything, but her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel. The kiss had been brief, but its impact lingered like a fire she couldn't extinguish. She told herself it was a mistake, that she had to stop this before it spiraled further out of control. Yet, when her phone buzzed and she saw Daniel's name on the screen, her resolve faltered. "Can we talk?" She stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, before typing her response. Not now. But not now didn't mean never, and she knew it. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual, carrying takeout and a rare smile. "Thought we could have dinner together," he said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. Mara's heart twisted. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him everything, but the words stuck in her throat like thorns. Instead, she nodded, forcing a smile as they sat at the table. Ethan talked about his day, about a deal he'd closed, and a promotion he was eyeing. Mara nodded in all the right places, but her mind was elsewhere. She wondered if he could sense the distance between them, if he noticed how she avoided his touch, how her laughter no longer came easily. Later, as they lay in bed, Ethan asleep beside her, Mara stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about the man she had married, the life they had built, and the woman she had become, someone she barely recognized. And then, as though summoned by her thoughts, her phone vibrated. She reached for it cautiously, her heart pounding as she read Daniel's message. "I need to see you. Please." Mara knew she should ignore it. She should block his number, erase his presence from her life. But her fingers betrayed her, typing out a response before her mind could catch up. "Tomorrow. Same time." The next evening, Mara waited by the window, her heart a storm of anticipation and dread. When Daniel's car pulled up, she felt the now familiar rush of adrenaline, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. He knocked softly, and when she opened the door, his expression was a mix of regret and longing. "Thank you for letting me come," he said quietly. Mara stepped aside to let him in, closing the door behind him. The house felt smaller with him in it, the air heavier. "I don't know how to stop this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Do you want to?" The question hung in the air, daring her to confront the truth she had been avoiding. Did she want to stop? "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I want anymore." Daniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Mara, I know this is complicated. I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you. Something real." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, torn between the man she had married and the man who now stood before her. "This can't end well," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe not," Daniel admitted. "But I can't walk away from you. Not yet." The distance between them dissolved, and before Mara could stop herself, she closed the space, her lips finding his in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. The rest of the evening unfolded in a way Mara could never take back. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was the way Daniel looked at her, the way he held her, as though she were something precious. But as the night wore on and reality began to creep back in, Mara felt the weight of what she had done settle heavily on her chest. When Daniel left, she stood at the door, watching his car disappear into the night. She knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice, and with each step, she was falling further into the abyss. And yet, she couldn't seem to turn back.